Thank you. Be with us. Be present with us. Welcome to the PWI's technical seminar on powering success. We are so excited to be back in London after a very long time at this lovely venue presenting on exciting topics today. Today we've got expert speakers bringing a range of electrification disciplines and from various disciplines and organizations covering third rail, fourth rail, power distribution, and overhead line. The speakers will focus on technologies that are enabling a reduction of cost and highlighting good practice across the UK and the continental Europe. I'm Mona Sahota. I am the incoming president for the PWI, and we're so pleased to have this event here today. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So we've got no fire alarms planned for today. If we do hear a fire alarm, the staff of the facility have got pink tops on. They will come and collect us, and we will follow them to a safe, secure place. There is a defibrillator on site. The defibrillator is located near the lifts, back towards where the tea and coffee and the exhibitors are set up. So there is a defibrillator there. And if anyone requires any first aid, please do contact anyone in the pink tops or any of the PWI folks, and we can make sure that any first aid that's needed is made available to you. Events like this are fantastic. There's a lot of organization that goes through pulling these together, and yourselves as our audience members make them even more delightful, and the reasons why PWI do these events. But specifically, the sponsors and the exhibitors, without their financial contributions, these events would not be possible. Really are grateful and generous for their support in pulling these events together. So we would like to thank the sponsors: SPL Powerlines, Atkins Realis, OLE Limited, Amy, Furrer and Fry, Stay Tight, Helix, as our sponsors, and of course our exhibitors, who you can visit during the breaks, who hopefully you visited earlier today and afterwards as well, during lunchtime. The exhibitors being Bam Ritchie's, Fugaro, Sistra, Rehal. We're very grateful for your support in these conferences and these seminars. So the PWI, these sort of events, bring together the importance of innovation and technology on the railway. The railway is the future of transport, and what we're doing in this space is bringing together different thoughts, different ideas, discussions on what we should do, can do. And it's really exciting to be able to expand the conversation of railways beyond maybe what was the traditional ideas of what railway were made of. And electrification is one such example. Our outgoing past president, who's finishing his tenure, Mr. Dearman, where are you, Peter? There you are hiding. Mr. Dearman, we thank you very much for all of your support in PWI, for what you have done in actually being very pivotal in opening up the horizons, the home of the PWI to the electrification community, to be able to bring together this element. Railway is a system. It brings together lots of elements, and without your support and your dedication and passion in pulling together, I believe this is the 5th electrification seminar. I mean, that's quite amazing. The PWI is now a welcoming home for electrification, and I think that's fantastic. And we'd like to thank you, Peter, for all of your support. And thank you. Thank you. So as I mentioned, PWI is more than, it's just more than one asset. It is multi-assets, and it's the interfaces and interactions of those assets and how they work together that forms the railway in its whole. It's exciting times ahead. It's challenging times ahead, and PWI also asks our members, oh, sorry, by the way, if you're not a member, please do become a member today. Shameless plug ended. We also challenge us. Are we doing the right thing? What are we doing to meet the challenges of climate change? What are we doing to be more cost effective? It's an excellent community and a forum for us to get together as railway people, as railway engineers or technicians in a generalist term, to say, how do we move outside of our assets to look at the system as a whole to meet the challenges of the future? And that's a great place PW is a great place for us to do this. Through the PWI, also, our members have access to learning, to training, to professional qualifications that they might not actually get in other professional organizations. And so for that reason, we're really excited about what the future of the railway will bring, but also what the future of PWI will bring. And so I'm going to stop waffling for a little bit and get on to introducing our keynote speaker. It is our privilege to have the Right Honourable Lord McLoughlin here today to kickstart our conference. Lord McLoughlin was a member of Parliament for West Derbyshire and later for Derbyshire Dales for 33 years. He's a Junior Minister for Transport in 1989 to 1992, and also held other ministerial roles before joining as a Conservative Whip's office. He was the Chief Whip for the Conservative Party from 2005 to 2012, and he was the Secretary of State for Transport from 2012 to 2016. And what an honour and privilege it is for us in PWI and for this seminar to have an esteemed speaker such as Lord McLoughlin here to kick us off for this conference. So I'd like to welcome you to the stage.
Well, Mona, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. I think we better wait till after you've heard what I say before you decide whether it was worth applauding. I must admit, Mona, congratulations. I understand you took over as president last Friday. So you're well at the start of your period of office. I can reflect back on my period of office, having been Secretary of State for Transport between 2012 and 2016. And as I sort of give some of those reflections this morning, and hopefully leave a little time at the end for a couple of questions if anybody so wishes, I always think about doing the first session at any conference when everybody is blurry-eyed because of some football match which took place yesterday evening, as to how we awaken everybody's interest. I suppose it could be worse. It could be the morning after the final, next Monday morning. So in choosing your timing, you did incredibly well. I must admit, when I was appointed Secretary of State for Transport, it was a bit unusual in the way it happened, because having been the Chief Whip of the Conservative Party, it's usually the Chief Whip and the Prime Minister who talk about reshuffles. And I was due to go and see David Cameron on the Friday to talk about the forthcoming reshuffle in 2012, when I suddenly got this phone call on the Thursday morning to say that the Prime Minister would quite like to have a drink with me that evening, and could I come down a bit earlier. So I left the Peak Park Planning Board a bit earlier than anticipated, which was a real pain to me, I tell you. And I sort of turned up to see the Prime Minister, and he said, "Patrick, let's go up to the flat and have a bit of a discussion." And we got up to the flat, and he said, "Patrick, if you want to stay as Chief Whip, you can." And you always know there's something coming there. And he said, "But I've got something else in mind for you. I'd like to move you to the Department of Transport, somewhere where you started your ministerial career off in 1989, when Mrs. Thatcher first appointed you there." And so there's obviously been a bit of forethought into the job, and he told me how important he saw transport, and how committed he was, and why he wanted me to do it. Having been in the Whip's office for 17 years, he thought I needed to see a bit of real life. He said, but this was unusual, because this was 5 weeks before the reshuffle was going to happen, and usually you get to know nothing about reshuffles until you're told on the day. He said, "But think about it, Patrick. You can talk to Lynn about it." That's my wife, and we're doing this. Reshuffles are done in little sort of jigsaw bits, and this was one little bit of the jigsaw, and it involved 3 particular people in this part of the jigsaw. He said, "We won't say anything about this tomorrow when we meet with the Cabinet Secretary and everybody else who we're going to do the reshuffle, the major planning of the reshuffle with. This is between you and me." So I phoned my wife. My wife thought it was a terribly bad idea that I could become Secretary of State for Transport. She said, "Look, you've been a backroom boy for 17 years in the Whip's office. Why do you want to move to the front and be Secretary of State for Transport? You know, don't do it. So I told the Prime Minister the next morning that I'd do it. I must admit, it was a fascinating and wonderful job to have. There were challenges. There were some very, very difficult times when I was Secretary of State for Transport. I remember arriving at the department to be told that the new franchise that had been awarded. There was another interesting little story reflection. Because this was going to be kept quiet for 6 weeks, but I knew I was probably going to be Secretary of State for Transport. But until it actually happens, you know, reshuffles, you can never rely on anything. Even though you think this is going to happen, until it actually happens, you should never take it for granted. So I said to my Principal Private Secretary as Chief Whip, I said, no summer recess, I'm going to take a few government department reports and read them over the summer recess. Get me the Treasury, get me the Home Office, get me the Environment Department, and get me Transport as well, just have a little luck. So I ditched all the other ones other than Transport, and I kept reading the annual report of the Department of Transport continually over the summer recess. I did learn one thing about departmental annual reports. They are a complete and utter waste of space, time and money. They tell you nothing about what is going on in the Department of Transport at all. But having done that and having sort of knowing over the summer that I was going to be likely to be the Secretary of State for Transport, I was obviously watching the news for everything that was going on transport related. And of course, at the time, there was a new franchise that had just been awarded to First Group. And Virgin were going to lose the Stagecoach Virgin, were going to lose the West Coast Main Line. And I was thinking, oh, please get that sorted before I get there. It wasn't. I arrived at the Department of Transport. I was reassured completely that it was all solid, sound, and I didn't have to worry about anything until the following week, when I was told that there were some problems. There was a report prepared for me, and then I was told there's some very serious problems. And one of the first things I had to do was to ring Richard Branson at midnight one particular evening, and tell him that we were no longer going to see them in court next week, but we were actually going to re-award them the contract, and to at the same time ring Tim O'Toole to tell him that the contract he thought he'd got for the next 15 years to run West Coast Main Line was not going to happen. And that was the start of some of the big decisions, some of the big issues that affected me as Secretary of State for Transport. I well remember the first Christmas wanting to go and have a look at some of the works that were going on over Christmas, because I was aware that Christmas is a time where big new improvements take place, and I had the choice of going to two particular sites. One was Cowley Bridge, where they were going to be doing some work, and the other was Milford Tunnel. Now, Milford Tunnel was not far from where I actually grew up as a young boy, sort of just on the edge of Cannock Chase. And I thought, no, I'll go down and have a look at the Cowley Bridge ones. To do that, we were going to have to fly from East Midlands Airport in the Network Rail helicopter down to just outside Cowley Bridge and see the efforts there. I turned up at the airport on this bank holiday Monday morning, and the pilot said to me, he said, "Secretary of State, we can get you down there, but it's going to be bloody rough." Now, I'm a bit of a nervous flyer, so I decided, okay, I thought, well, I've got the choice of still going to Milford, so I'll go to the Milford and see that particular set of works instead. I drove to Milford, along with my private secretary and my special advisor, and I turned up at Milford, and blow me if David Higgins, the chief executive of Network Rail at the time, wasn't waiting for me at Milford. Now, how did he know that I was going to end up going to Milford and not down to the Cowley site? I just never know. So that was a fascinating experience. But what was also an interesting experience was the work that was going on in Milford Tunnel, because it was only a small bit of work. It was basically replacing the drainage and relaying the rails. It was I think it was about a £4 million scheme, so not essentially very much money. And I questioned, why this was actually necessary and why it was being done, and was it really so essential to have to close down the line? I was told that if it hadn't been done, trains have to slow to 30 miles an hour through that particular tunnel until this work was done. And it actually did make a big saying thing, but you would never have seen where that £4 million was being spent as a passenger. And I think that is some of the issues that we don't quite get across about big infrastructure projects. One of the projects that I also saw was the resignaling of Derby Station. That was £150 million. You wouldn't really know where that £150 million has been spent. And there is always that pressure on finance and on cost. We've seen, I believe, a remarkable renaissance of our railways. You know, back in the late 80s, the early 90s, passenger numbers were 700 million a year and declining. The last year before the pandemic, it was 1.8 billion passengers. I think railways did go through a revolution, and it was partly a revolution by using the private sector. And I think getting that balance right between the use of the private sector, but also the importance of the structure overall, is something very important. Now, when I accepted this invitation, I didn't expected a general election would have taken place just over a week ago. We've now got a new government. We've got a new rail minister in Peter Hendy, who I think is a great appointment, a fantastic appointment. The last person to appoint Peter Hendy to anything was me when I made him chairman of Network Rail, when I was Secretary of State for Transport. And to see him now as the new rail minister is going to be, I think, quite a challenge for him, because there's sometimes there can be a bit of an awkwardness if you know too much about the subject you're actually the minister for. It can sometimes be a disadvantage to you, but I think Peter will bring a knowledge to the issue, having done both Network Rail and before that having been Commissioner of Transport for London, as to know just how important rail is to our country and how important it can be. I, as I referenced a few moments ago, grew up in Cannock Chase, and I was involved and saw the reopening of the Cannock Chase railway line. I was very pleased to see it fully electrified. I kept badgering Peter every time he came in to see me about the electrification of that particular railway line, because it was sort of through where I lived, basically, where I grew up. And I think it has made a fantastic difference to the regeneration of the Cannock Chase area. And that is also something, because we have to ask ourselves partly, you know, what is rail for? What is its key objectives? And I think there are many key objectives. I wrote them down a little while ago, and I can't find a piece of paper. But to me, it isn't just about moving passengers, but it is also about economic growth. It's also about regeneration. And areas that you see get resurfaced with railway areas do get regeneration, do get economic growth, and also we see a rise in the passenger numbers. I think that is also quite an important part of what we need to see for the railways. There is a cost, and sometimes the costs are frightening. And I think that is one of the issues that the government will have to address. But I was very involved as Secretary of State in the whole question and debate around HS2. I very much regret the decision that was made last year. I think it was the wrong decision to cancel HS2 beyond Birmingham. I look at the impact that HS2 has already had around Birmingham, and it is really quite staggering. 10 billion has been added to the West Midlands economy over the next 10 years. Within the HS2 impact zones, 41,000 additional houses, 704,000 of extra square metre new floor space for offices, 30,000 new jobs. Since the Royal Assent was granted in 2017, a 66% increase in planning applications, a 240% increase in the planned value of construction projects, and a 484% increase in the number of new homes planned. within the economic region that we're talking about. It has a major impact. Anybody who goes around Birmingham sees it now. It is absolutely astounding what is going on around Curzon Street, not just Curzon Street, but the areas around it. And one of the challenges that the new government will have to come to terms with is what happens beyond Anzaker, because I think that is would be an incredibly congested piece of rail infrastructure. HS2 was never about speed. It was always about capacity on the network. Absolutely about capacity. And we partly lost that argument early on because it was called HS2. I did toy with trying to change the name, but I thought you'd just be pushing water against yourself. It would be a waste of time doing so. But it was about capacity. When we look at the Victorian rail network, which we sit there and admire in awe, and it is fantastic, it is amazing, some of the structures, but it wasn't really built to today's standards. And when you start repairing it, you start coming across some of the shortcuts which were taken, which you can't ignore and you have to put right. The Farnborough Tunnel was a tunnel up in the just outside Bolton, which when we came to rebore it, we found lots of things that would not be allowed in any way, shape or form in today, but we would never have known about them had they not been rebored. But that did actually cost us some extra money. So I think with the railway system, with the railway structure, we have something to be rightly proud of. We've got to address how we make it much more efficient, much more economically viable. We've also got to correct and understand the environmental pressures which come up on us now. When I was First Secretary of State, electrification was being rolled out. We were rolling it out. It did become more expensive than was anticipated, so we have to address those kind of issues. But I think it is absolutely essential for what needs to be done. We've seen a great deal, I think, of improvements in our railways. I remember when I first became the Member of Parliament, the last place you would want to spend any time at all would be St Pancras or King's Cross station. At least most people wouldn't want to spend any time at St Pancras or King's Cross station. Now, they're almost destinations in their own rights. And if you arrive early, it doesn't really matter. There's quite a lot to do. Look at the station regeneration and what impacts that had, not just around King's Cross, St Pancras, but also around Birmingham New Street and other stations that have been improved. They are very, very important strategic areas in their economies. I think one of the things that's going to change over the next few years is the growth of the metro mayors, the growth of the importance of the metro mayors. But because they see, there's no doubt about it, that they see transport as one of their key areas of priority. I see that as Chairman of Transport for the North, working with Andy Berman, Kim McGuinness, who is the new mayor in Newcastle, and all the other metro mayors, from Tracy Bourbon to Oliver Coppard and others, that they see transport as one of their key areas of concentration. And I think that that is also something that is going to which will change the way in which we do transport planning in this country, and we do transport investment as well. Because in so much as getting along with the investment that is there, but also attracting in new investment to these areas, that is going to be an incredibly important part of the journey. We're going to get, I think, probably in the next 5 days in the King's Speech, which takes place on Wednesday of next week, we'll probably get at least one, if not more, transport bills. So therefore, then the whole question of GBR and the way in which GBR gets rolled out will be a vitally pressing issue over the next 18 months as far as Parliament is concerned. But I think it's a vitally important issue for the industry as to the way in which it comes. I'm all in favour of a guiding mind, providing he agrees with mine. I think that is something that we're all going to sort of have to come to terms with. Particularly big organisations and how you break into those big organisations to make sure that we make the best use of the private sector. I don't want to see GBR become a replacement for the private sector, because I think the private sector has a lot to offer our railway infrastructure in this country. Of course, advancement in technologies, new systems of drones and all that kind of technology is going to make a difference, should make it cheaper, should make it easier. Sometimes it doesn't quite work out that way. And I think that's going to be one of the important points for us. The way in which we have seen economic activity increases our railways is, I think, vitally important for the country. The government talks about needing to see economic growth. The other thing is, as well, is the way in which our railway usage has changed since the pandemic. It is hard to think that the pandemic was just 4 years ago and the impact that that had on society. But we're now seeing a lot more weekend usage of the railways than we previously did before, and the change in travel patterns. And so I think what we probably will need to do and need to address, although these things I fully accept take planning, is the way in which we do carry out the repairs on the railways and the upgrades on the railways. And perhaps we're going to see more blockages of certain sectors in other times, and not just trying to work at weekends or just outside the evening working period. I think I look at some of the projects which took place, the remodelling of Nottingham Station, which saw Nottingham Station close for, I think, something like 14 weeks over a summer period. Providing it is well planned, that was well planned, I think that is going to be a much better way of us providing that kind of upgrade. We're seeing it on TransPennine at the moment. The TransPennine upgrade, which is currently ongoing, I had a presentation on it just a few months ago, and I said, well, it's not really an upgrade, the TransPennine, it's a rebuilding of the railway. It literally is a massive £11 billion project. The trouble is, it takes over 9 years. And by the time you've taken 9 years, people have forgotten what it was like before it was upgraded, and will have sort of had enough and complained about it. A lot of these big projects are so frustratingly slow as far as people are concerned. I think much more blockade work is going to be necessary. It is going to happen on the TransPennine, but I think there'll be a lot more appetite for it happening a lot more across the system. I realise it does take a lot of planning. I well remember the redesigning of London Bridge Station, and that actually, the start of the work on that took place on my time as Secretary of State. Not the planning, but the start of the actual work. And it was really, really tough, because people were using the station, but also parts of it were closed. And if we could have blockaded it and not had people using that station, it would have cost probably 60% of what it cost, and would have been done in less than half the time. But the implications of closing that station at that particular stage were just not possible. But I think certain areas where that can be done, it is absolutely necessary. So those are a few of my reflections as Secretary of State for Transport. It was a great job to have. I was there long enough to see quite a few things that I wanted to see in operation, and to see those operate. It took me about a year to get used to all the acronyms. Gosh, the Transport Department and every department has a huge range of acronyms, which mean absolutely nothing to the general public. I well remember sitting around one meeting, and the group of civil servants there were explaining to me about H-loss. And I said, well, why can't we call it something more straightforward, like the Rail Investment Programme? And one civil servant at the back of the room said, but Secretary of State, that would be RIP. Which was not seen as a great way forward. So we have seen a remarkable transformation of the rail industry. There's been some bad times over the last 12 months with industrial action, which does the industry no good whatsoever, because reliability, as we all know, is so vitally important. But I think the opportunities are there over the next few years. I very much wait with anticipation to see what the announcements will be in the King's speech as far as what's going to happen with legislation, and also to see how Peter Hendy adapts to his new role as the Rail Minister. And those are my reflections. What I said was that because it's first thing in the morning, I'd allow for 10 minutes questions, and I've just had the sign that says we've got 10 minutes left. So at that, if anybody has got any questions, I will take. I think there is a roving mic. If anyone, I can see somebody with a hand halfway up the back, and there, down there.
Okay. Hi, it's Martin Horsman from Enertrack. Yeah, thanks for that, Patrick. Very illuminating and interesting, especially the stories. So Mona advocated that we should expand our thinking and discussion beyond individual asset groups. And if we think about energy, and if we think about energy savings, the opportunities actually only exist when we take a whole system view. But there's big barriers against taking that view, and they're legal. If we think about the fourth railway package, separating the track from the train, they're also financial if we think about the increased subsidy now compared to pre-pandemic. But they're also very much, therefore, political. So just kind of following on from what you were saying about GBR, do you have any advice for us in terms of how we can get through those barriers to take a whole system approach to release those opportunities for energy saving?
I think it's very important for organisations like PWI and other bodies that bring the whole industry and parts of the industry together to sort of be looking very closely at what the legislation is saying, what needs to be done, because there will be that time when it is going through its scrutiny period, both in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, that these points can be particularly made. And I think there will be goodwill from everybody wanting to make a success of this legislation and the long-term implications of it. But also, as I do make the point earlier on, because I think it's not perhaps something we've quite got ourselves ready to yet, just how important the new metro mayors are as far as a body to feed in as well to what government and what is going on. So I'm afraid it's a bit of a complicated answer, really. There's not a simplistic way forward. But also, I think companies need to show some of the great initiatives. And it still amazes me when I go around and meet rail companies, as I do both in my own personal position and interest, just what imagination and initiatives there are there as far as providing the service. I'm pretty sure, I can't speak for Peter, it would be entirely wrong for me to do so, but I'm pretty sure he understands just the sheer breadth of activity across the whole piece as far as the railway industry. He probably better understands it than anybody who's held that job. I thought Hugh Merriman was a good rail minister who understood, having been chairman of the Transport Committee. But Peter has grown up with these issues and will have seen right across the piece what can be done. So, and very aware of the regeneration too. I mean, I haven't talked about the Elizabeth line as to what that has created as far as improvement in and the engineering excellence of that. I mean, just the engineering excellence. And yes, there was a delay. Yes, it was over budget. Yes, it was late. Some people say it was 3 years late. It wasn't 3 years late. It was 30 years late. It was announced by Cecil Parkinson in 1989 when I was a junior minister at the Department of Transport, for God's sake. You get big projects like that. If you're updating projects, you come across problems that you never knew existed, as I said earlier on in my speech. So there will be problems. There will be times when things overrun. 5 minutes. We'll go a couple more questions. There's a gentleman in the middle at the back there. I'm told it's very important to run to time, so if we finish 5 minutes early, nobody will mind. He's just nodded down here, so that's all right.
Good to see you back on the square speaking about railways, Patrick. Over the last few parliaments, there's been a number of lobbying attempts by RIA and a number of the others in the industry to have a rolling programme of electrification. But the government's interest seems to be more in the decarbonisation of roads and less so in the decarbonisation of railways. I guess some of that is down, as you've mentioned, to cost and time and the complexity that goes with that. And there is a proclivity in the industry to design everything from scratch rather than go out and buy products. But will we now see in opposition a full-throated support of the electrification of our railways and the decarbonisation that can bring and the movement of freight onto the railway system, which we didn't see in government?
Look, I'm all in favour of freight moving more freight on the railways. But the problem is capacity. The problem is that people also want to see passenger trains moving as well, and so capacity is a big issue, and that was one of the main reasons, as I said earlier on, behind the whole case for HS2, and it takes time for these big projects to move. I think you will see the government wanting to see decarbonisation. And I think the railways certainly is there in line with it, but there is no magic pot of money, and I suppose what the Treasury will always be saying is how much they're already subsidising the railways overall by. So if we get greater usage of the railways, then that subsidy comes down, and there'll be more money for other schemes as well. But there should be, I did have a rolling programme for electrification. I remember once commenting when David Cameron held a reception at Downing Street for the transport industries and various people. I said the only trouble with being Secretary of State for Transport in a Cameron government is that you are the third in line for the high vis after the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, then the Secretary of State for Transport. And both David Cameron and George Osborne very much got infrastructure spend. And in fact, George Osborne was presented with a plan to scrap the Elizabeth line when he first became Chancellor and said no. And we've got to, and one of the things I think that we should be looking at as well, and the government have said that they're going to give a greater role to the National Infrastructure Commission, is actually getting cross-party consensus about big infrastructure projects. They are complicated, they are usually controversial. They are controversial in local areas, of course they are. But actually what you have to look at is what is overall in the national interest, in the country's interest. I remember saying at one stage, I find it ironic. I can go from London to Paris, or to Amsterdam, or to other European cities on a high-speed train, but I can't go from London to Birmingham, to Manchester, to Leeds, to our great cities on such infrastructure like that. I still think that is the case. I still think that is one of the reasons why there should be a look at the whole question of how we get connectivity between our great cities, so that not everybody thinks they've got to come to London to get into the technology industries. There's so much happening with the whole thing about the way in which technology is allowing not necessarily to have to be in an office or to be in the centre of London. I think there are lots of opportunities there. Right, I think we've done with that. I'm 2 minutes ahead. We're done with questions, Mona. Thank you very much indeed. I wish you a very successful day today. Some of the subjects you're now going to be doing, the real technical parts, are fascinating. I wish I could stay for it, but good luck with the rest. Thank you very much indeed.